رأيت الذنوب تميت القلوب ويتبعها الذل إنهار وترك الذنوب.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is I just wanted to come and on behalf of BC Muslim Association to welcome you all to this function today. The function has been coordinated and organized with a lot of effort being put in based on all the issues that has been going on around the world and some of the events which took place in Canada. And that has driven us in cooperation with the RCMP, partnering with RCMP, to come up with a program in such a way which educates our own people first and then the public at large so they understand truly the meaning of Islam, the religion, and the differentiation therein between what Islam really teaches and what we practice versus those who use the name of Islam in a negative way which labels the Muslims of the world in a negative way. Just trying to keep it very simple. But behind this whole Islamic picture, we must understand that in the world, the Muslim population in the world is more than 1.3 to 1.5 billion people of Islamic faith. When you come to Canada, it's more than close to 1.5 million Muslims living very peacefully for last more than 100 years in this beautiful country of ours called Canada. In British Columbia, we estimate it's more than 100 to 120,000 Muslims living here for last same 100 years. Myself, for example, close to 50 years living in this beautiful country. My children were born here, I have grandchildren here, and this is the same story behind thousands and thousands of Muslims living in this country. They have grown here, the children have grown here, they have got married here and they have their own children, and they're progressing into every field that you can think of, from doctors to lawyers to social workers to teachers, and every field that you can think of, there is a Muslim involved in it. The point I'm trying to make is we are part and parcel of the fabric of this beautiful country. We are living in peace, and let us not allow this 1 or 2 incidents of 1 or 2% of the Muslim population derail the beautiful religion of Islam. That's all I'm going to say, so please pay attention and support us in passing this message out there, that we are here working together in collaboration with RCMP to serve this beautiful community of ours in BC, as well as take this message across Canada or wherever we can. We should reach out and serve the need to safeguard and secure this country to the best of our ability while safeguarding our religion at the same level of commitment, dedication, and respect. Thank you very much, and I will allow Tracy Keeney to continue as Master of Ceremony for this occasion, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for taking this task of organizing it and helping us get this thing message out. Thank you very much.
We'll try this, but often, is it actually working at all?
It is working.
On behalf of Kwantlen Polytechnic University, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all We are meeting today on the unceded lands of the Kwantlen First Nation, from whom we take our name, the C.A.V.E, the Musqueam, the C.A.V.E, and the Tawasan. So welcome. It is a great pleasure to be able to host the second in a series of speaker dialogues around the topic of peace, war, and Islam. We are very grateful to Mufti Asim Rashid, who has been working with law enforcement and with our local political leaders to organize this campaign. And we hope today, again, for a very productive community-based dialogue. It is wonderful to see so many people here on a Saturday afternoon. So, a couple of housekeeping notes before we proceed any further. We have been asking people to sign in. If you haven't had a chance to do that, please do, at least before you leave. We are also, because of somewhat limited time today, going to use question cards. So as the speakers are presenting their material to you, if you have questions that occur to you, there will be time during the break to take one of the cards on the side, write down your question, and then we will leave time at the end to go through those questions in a somewhat more organized way. So that's the plan for questions and answers. Today's conference will feature 3 speakers. Mufti Asim Rashid from the BC Muslim Association, Sergeant Derek Gravel from the RCMP Community Outreach team of INSET, and Newton North Delta MP Jenny Sims. And again, we would like to welcome you all to Kwantlen. It's a great pleasure to host you. I will introduce each speaker in a little bit more detail as we go through. The plan is for each of our speakers to present. We will then take about a 10 to 15 minute break for refreshments, and then come back with your questions and answers. The only request we would make on the question cards is that you make a note to whom your question is directed, and then we're sure that the right person ends up answering. So with all of that housekeeping business out of the way, our first speaker today will be Mufti Asim Rashid, noted Islamic scholar and head of the the BC Muslim Association, current director of religion and Islamic education at the BC Muslim Association, which is one of the largest Muslim associations in North America. Mufti Rashid was born in Pakistan, raised in Canada, and holds a master's degree in Islamic studies with a specialization in Islamic law. He is a noted scholar of the Quran, the Hadith, of Islamic banking, and many other Islamic sciences. He's authorized numerous works, far too numerous to list, in Arabic, in Urdu, and in English. And it is my very, very great pleasure to welcome him to speak to you today at Kwantlen Polytechnic University.
Thank you very much for those kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihi al-kareem, amma ba'd. I begin in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. And I send salutations upon all His prophets and His chosen and last prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him. Respected guests, we are living in interesting times. We are living in times when one is frequently asking the question of what the conflict is all about. With so many conflicts taking place around the world, one cannot help but ask, what is the actual cause of the conflict? Is it a conflict of perceptions? Is it a conflict of interests? Is it a conflict of religions? Is it a conflict that can be resolved? Is it a conflict that has no answers? And are these conflicts ever going to end? We cannot cover all the conflicts in the world, and in a short seminar such as this one, we can hardly even cover a single conflict. But our aim through this gathering is to shed some light and increase our awareness and knowledge so that we can better understand some of the conflicts. And when the light of knowledge enters one's mind and heart, the darkness of confusion and suspicion and animosity which arises from that begins to dissipate. We definitely need to learn more about one another. That applies to Muslims as well as non-Muslims. We need to learn about the times we're living in, and we need to learn about the history of the events that are taking place around the world. The segment that I'm going to present to you is going to be a little bit about Islam and the concepts of peace and war that Islam upholds. It's not going to be a very lengthy lecture. It's not going to be a complete talk on Islam. It's just going to be snippets. That's all we have time for. And the intention and the hope is that if the interest is there, we intend to have workshops on specific subjects as follow-ups from this specific seminar. Islam is a monotheistic religion. In other words, it revolves around the belief in one God, one absolute being. And Muslims believe that the God that they believe in is the God of everyone. He's everyone's God. We don't believe that the Christians or the Jews or anyone else has a different God. We believe there is just one God. And we believe in Him in an absolute way. In other words, we ascribe all the qualities of beauty and glory and grace and generosity and kindness and power. We ascribe all of those attributes to God. And when we say Islam, when a Muslim says the word Islam, they're not thinking of a religion, a faith that was introduced somewhere in the 7th century by a man named Muhammad. When a Muslim says, I am a Muslim, or I follow Islam, they perceive that to be the culmination of teachings that have been consistently passed down by all the prophets that are mentioned in the Judaic and the Christian tradition. Muslims believe in all of those prophets, beginning with Adam and Noah and moving on to Abraham and Jacob and Jesus and Moses and Joshua and Jeremiah and on and on and on. All of these names are very, very familiar to Muslims, and they're very dear to Muslims. A Muslim cannot be a Muslim unless and until they believe in all of these people as true prophets of God. A Muslim is required to love Jesus. A Muslim is required to love Moses, just like they're required to love their Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. And we believe that there are certain teachings that are consistent in the message of all of these prophets. The teaching of one God, the teaching of the institution of prophethood itself, the teachings pertaining to the afterlife, resurrection and accountability, the teachings pertaining to predestiny, the teachings pertaining to good and bad, the lawful and the unlawful. These are common teachings between all of these prophets. Now, to narrow it down, Islam is also an Abrahamic faith. In other words, just like Judaism and Christianity find their source in the Prophet Abraham, so does Islam. And the way it sort of works, from a bloodline perspective, is that the Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, is the father figure. He has a son, Isaac, and Isaac lives with him in Palestine. The Prophet Abraham has migrated from Iraq, to modern-day Iraq, ancient Mesopotamia, to Palestine. He has settled there. He has family there. And at one point in his life, he goes to Mecca, all the way out in Arabia, and he leaves his other wife and child there. And there they grow up. He chooses to live in Palestine, but tends to visit Mecca once a year. He passes away in Palestine, and his son Isaac has another son, Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons, and all of those stories that we read about in the religious texts, in the Abrahamic texts, they're pretty much standard. And from Jacob begins these 12 tribes, the children of Israel. The other name of Jacob is Israel. And Jacob is referred to as Israel in the Quran. So when we say the children of Israel, we're talking about the progeny of the Prophet Jacob. Peace be upon them. And all of the prophets that came after him, after Jacob, were from his children, from his progeny. Right up to the Prophet Jesus. In the other part of the world where Abraham had left his other son, Ismail, Ismail also had many children who eventually became the fathers of tribes. And those tribes grew and spread throughout Arabia, but there were no prophets after Ismail. And after many, many centuries, a man by the name of Muhammad emerges and declares prophethood. And interestingly, he is telling people that I am inviting you to the same message that the prophets before me invited. In fact, his wife's cousin, who was a prominent Christian scholar of that time, after listening to what the Prophet Muhammad had experienced, he said, I know what you're going through. You're experiencing the same thing that the Prophet Moses experienced. And if what you're saying is true, it's only a matter of time before people will oppose you and they will drive you out of this city. So he goes on and conveys this message. This is a man who has no access to Judaic literature or Christian literature. Primarily because this man cannot read and cannot write. Cannot read, he cannot write. He grows up, he is born and raised in a place where there are virtually no Christians and Jews. But the message he is conveying and the book that he is receiving has all of those same underlying themes. The book opens up by instructing human beings to read, to educate themselves. And the opening verses of the book in its compilation talks about believers, defining believers are those who believe in what is revealed to you, O Muhammad, and revealed to those prophets that were before you, meaning all of the other religious texts, the Bible and the Torah and the Psalms. And from here begins a very interesting journey. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon his life, is divided into two general segments. There is the life that he spent in Mecca, and that was for 13 years after declaring prophethood. So he declared prophethood at the age of 40. And he lives in Mecca for 13 years after that. Then there is the next era of his life, which takes place in the city that he migrates to called Medina. And he spends 10 years there. So 13 years of his prophethood are in Mecca, his hometown, and 10 years are in the city he migrates to called Medina. within these 23 years, all of the teachings of Islam are revealed. The Quran is revealed gradually, slowly, and very much in context with the current events. So in that Meccan period, there aren't too many injunctions, instructions being revealed at all. The verses that are revealed in Mecca are talking about those same themes that the prophets have been talking about for centuries, for millennia. They're talking about the oneness of God, the greatness of God, the favors of God. They're talking about the afterlife and what it means. They're talking about things like accountability. And they're talking about these themes over and over and over again. We're not really getting a lot of teachings per se. It's more about beliefs, a mindset. This is the same period of time when the Muslims are being persecuted. And they are being persecuted in a very, very serious way. When it is discovered that such and such person has accepted Islam, there is nothing for them but torment. They are tortured, they are beaten, they are embarrassed. Some of them are chained up, some of them are whipped publicly. And it is a very, very dangerous environment for anyone who professes to be a Muslim. And yes, some of them are even killed. They're not doing anything. They're just practicing their faith. They're doing it in their homes. But they're being persecuted. For 13 years, the Prophet, peace be upon him, bears this. And the Quran reiterates the message that was given to them. Kufu aydiyakum wa aqimus salah. Withhold your hands, restrain yourselves. Focus on prayer. Focus on prayer. The Quran talks about patience, forbearance, talks about forgiving, talks about tolerance. It talks about resisting the urge to take matters into your own hands. Finally, when the city of Mecca becomes literally impossible to live in for Muslims, they are told to migrate to Medina. The era of Medina is very different from the era of Mecca in many ways, but it is also similar in many ways. Similar in the sense that while in Mecca, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was surrounded by non-Muslims, and the Muslims were a small minority. But he did not choose to associate himself with people based on their faith. He chose to associate himself with people based on how much they accepted him, how much they took him for who he was, and not what they wanted him to be. One of those very important people is his uncle, his true uncle, Abu Talib. This was a man who never accepted Islam. In fact, he died without accepting Islam. But he was one of the most important figures for Islam and the Muslims because he was standing there protecting the Muslims and protecting the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he said that, I don't agree with his faith, I don't subscribe to his faith, but he is not a bad person. He does not mean wrong or evil to anyone. Just let him do what he is doing. It's a good message, it's a helpful message. Fine, I worship. He was a pagan. He says, I worship my own idols. But I don't think that this man and his followers should be persecuted just because they choose another path. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, held him very dear. And it was his desire that he should accept Islam. But he never did. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, never ever forced him. He never did. He never tried to force him. All he did was ask him, request him. Right till his last moments, he requested him. And he said, no, I can't. And that was it. That was the end of it. And there were many such people. In that Meccan era, there were many non-Muslims who had stood up and said, you know what? It's not fair that these people be persecuted just because they have a different faith. We'll protect them. And it was a tradition in the Arab tribes at that time that an influential person could take another person under their personal protection and say, you know what? Hands off. If you touch them, now you're dealing with me. And that happened for many Muslims. Then the migration takes place. And here again, you have Muslims living in an environment where there are many, many non-Muslims. But the difference is, the contrast is, that Medina is welcoming them. Medina wants them there. In fact, a couple of years before the Prophet migrated with the Muslims, the people of Medina came to him. And they said, we have issues in our city that have been going on for centuries. There are wars happening between tribes, people are being killed and butchered, and we cannot find a solution, nor can we find a person who can give us solutions. We believe you're the person. We believe you're the man who can unite us all. Why don't you come to Medina? When the Prophet, peace be upon him, did end up reaching Medina, one of the first steps that he took was make a kind of a constitution, a charter. And this charter was documented for the sake of bringing everyone on a common ground. And the charter included equal rights for people of all faiths. Now remember, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has been declared as the official ruler, for lack of another word. He is effectively the ruler. And he is coming with Islam. And Islam is visible. It's being practiced everywhere. But even in those situations, it was never imposed on the non-Muslims. And the purpose of this constitution was that everyone should be allowed to practice their own religion with autonomy and with freedom. And no one has the right to stop another faith from practicing their beliefs. Whether it's their worships, or it's their traditions and customs, or it's the norms that they have been living with for centuries. In fact, prior to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's migration to Medina, there were many Arabs who had given their children over to the Jews for their upbringing. The Jewish rabbis, they felt that these are pious people and they will look after our children. And it was kind of like a pledge that if such and such thing happens, I'm going to give my child to these rabbis to raise, in their monastery or whatever the case may be. Now when these Arabs accepted Islam, they said, we want our children to be Muslim too. But the children had already grown up as Jews. And it was really bothering these Muslim parents that how come we're Muslims and our children are non-Muslims? Is there some way we can force them to accept Islam? At that time, this verse was revealed, La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. What is right has become distinct from what is wrong. Let people choose themselves. It's their choice. Once they have adopted a way of life, there is no way you can force them. And I tell you, if there was a place and a time when people could have been forced to accept Islam, it was at that place in Medina, at that time when the Muslims were ruling Medina with absolute authority. If there was a place where they could have been forced to convert, it was there and then. But the Quran comes out and says no. Because faith is something of the heart. Faith is not something you can force into someone. You cannot force a person to believe in a certain way. They will believe in it if their heart accepts it. And that's how it is. Every faith is like that. And time passes. And this constitution of Medina is all about being a citizen of Medina. It's not about being a Muslim, or a Jew, or a pagan, or a Christian. It doesn't matter, because all of these groups existed. It was about putting an end to those tribal wars and skirmishes that had been happening, that had resulted in the loss of hundreds of lives. That no tribe, no member of any tribe will be allowed to attack or to harm a member of another tribe based on the old enmities. And we, as a diverse community of these four major faith groups, the Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans, we will work together for the security of Medina, and every citizen of Medina will have the right to the same security. Every one of them is entitled to that. And none of us will make allies with the enemies of Medina in an effort to compromise the safety and security of its residents. And anyone who does that will be deemed a traitor, and we will all collectively take action against that person, no matter who it is. And in this way, all of the people were unified. And they were living in what we call harmonious coexistence. And that continued until some people started breaking off, splintering into rogue groups, and partnering up with people who wanted to attack Medina. So the Battle of Badr takes place. It's the first major attack on Medina. The Battle of Uhud takes place. It's the second major attack on Medina. The Battle of Ahzab, the Battle of the Trench as it was, where they laid siege on Medina for many, many days. And this was a unified front of many different groups, including those people from Mecca. But they weathered it. They weathered those storms. And they continued and persisted. And a time came, peace be upon him, saw in his dream that he and the Muslims are going to Mecca and performing the minor pilgrimage. They're walking around the Kaaba, that sacred house. And so he says, let's set out. This is the 6th year after the migration. He said, let's go and perform this minor pilgrimage. So about 1,400 Muslims, they don the ihram, which is the dress of the pilgrim. The dress of the pilgrim is, it's 2 white sheets. And they took with them the sacrificial animals. No weapons, nothing. We are going for pilgrimage. When they reach the outskirts of Mecca, they are stopped. The people of Quraysh, the tribe that lived in Mecca, intercepted them and said that we're not going to let you enter. And they said, well, that place, that's a sacred place. It belongs to everyone. You can't have exclusive rights over it. They said, well, we choose not to let you enter. Now, the Muslims are enraged. How dare they stop us? All the Arabs have agreed that anyone at any time can go there for their pilgrimage, and the pagans were doing their worship in their own way. The Muslims were doing worship in their own way. But that was an open space. It was a neutral space that everyone had access to. But they weren't allowed, and these people had traveled on foot for hundreds of kilometers. So it was a perfect chance to take some retaliatory action. But the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, at that time said, I am now, at this point, I'm going to offer you a truce and a peace treaty. If you want, you can accept it. And if you want war, then we'll give you war. But my proposal is that we come to some kind of a ceasefire agreement. And he sends his own emissary, his ambassador, Uthman ibn Affan, to go and start making the negotiations. Those negotiations did not work. So they sent their own emissary, Suhail ibn Amr, to the Prophet ﷺ, and the discussion started. A peace treaty is drawn up. There's going to be a ceasefire for 10 years. And any Muslim who migrates, in other words, who defects from Medina and comes back to Mecca, he will not be sent back. But any Meccan who defects to Medina, the Muslims will send him back. In other words, somebody wants to leave Mecca, become a Muslim, and go live in Medina, you are obliged to send him back. Now it seems kind of one-sided. It seems unfair. But the Prophet Muhammad agreed to those terms. While the treaty is being drawn up, one man is brought in chains. He's brought in shackles. He has just accepted Islam. He is a resident of Mecca. He has accepted Islam. He wants to go to Medina. The Meccans have arrested him and brought him to that place where the treaty is being drawn up. They said, oh Muhammad, this is your first test. Let's see how strong you are, how firm you are in the word that you give. So the man sees that he's being compromised. He's being sent back. So he cries out. He says, oh Muslims, am I going to be returned back to the non-Muslims after I've accepted Islam? You're going to send me back to them? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, at that time said, we are a people who observe their treaties. We don't break our treaties. And he did have them sent back. And in this way, the ceasefire and the treaty was drawn up. And one of the terms of the treaty was that anyone who attacks an ally of these two groups is as if he is attacking the other group directly. In other words, if you attack an ally of the people of Medina, it's like you're attacking the people of Medina. And if we attack one of your allies, it's like we're attacking you. And that will constitute a breach of this treaty. So, 1 year later, one of the Meccans' allies attacked an ally of the Muslims. And they killed the whole tribe of people that were sleeping. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ sent a message to these people that I'm giving you three options. Either you dissociate yourself with those allies and say, look, it wasn't us, we have nothing to do with these people, and you pull them out of this treaty. Or you pay the blood money of those innocent people that were killed. Or you dissolve this treaty. They said, you know what, we're dissolving this treaty, we're breaking this treaty. And then the Prophet, peace be upon him, says, okay, if you're dissolving the treaty, then we're coming into Mecca. And he comes into Mecca with 10,000 people. And you think, what's going to happen? What is going to happen with 10,000 people? How much destruction is going to happen? You have the chance to take revenge for all of these years of torment. So one man from amongst the Muslims says, today we're going to butcher these people. Al-Yawma Yawm al-Malhama. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is informed of the words that that man said. And that man was holding the flag of his tribe, the banner of his tribe. The Prophet had him summoned and had the banner removed from his hand and given to his son. And he said, no, today is not the day of butchering. Al-Yawma Yawm al-Marhama. Today is the day where we're going to show how merciful we are. And one of their people accepts Islam, Abu Sufyan, who was a chief. And he says, the Prophet says, anyone who enters into your house is safe. He says, my house is limited. He says, anyone who enters into the mosque of Makkah is safe. The mosque is also limited. He says, anyone who enters into his house and closes the doors is safe. We are only going to take action against those people who come out armed against us. Otherwise, everyone in their homes is safe. Where in the world have you heard of a conquest of this type? Where all the security you need is just go home and close your door. If you don't come out with swords, we have nothing to do with you. So in this way Islam spread. That treaty that was signed the year before, the Quran gives us a whole chapter on that, and it's called the chapter of the conquest, Al-Fath. And the Muslims were obliged as a part of the treaty that they have to go back. They will not perform pilgrimage this year. They're going to come back next year. And they were going back in very, very low spirits, dejected. They're feeling like they really, really got the shorter end of the stick. And the Quran says, we have given you open victory. They said, what kind of victory is this? We're going back disgraced. We came out to do pilgrimage and we are not able to do pilgrimage. What kind of victory is this? The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, you will see. And then later on, the Quran defined what victory is. Victory, as defined by the Quran, is إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. When the help of Allah and conquest comes, and you see people entering into the deen, into the religion of Allah in throngs, that is your victory. So the Quran openly stipulates that the victory for a Muslim is not that they get control over a land, or over a country, or over a state. The victory for Islam and Muslims is that Islam spreads. And as long as that is happening, Muslims are victorious. Even if they're being persecuted, even if they're being put on the defense, even if they're having to step back on the back foot, it's still victory because Islam is spreading. In those 10 years, the religion of Islam was completed. And injunctions and instructions pertaining to creed, pertaining to worships, pertaining to mannerisms, pertaining to rights and duties, pertaining to foreign relations and international relations, and pertaining to peace and war. All of these instructions were given. Now when we talk about war, you might say that, well, okay, you've talked about all the peaceful aspects, but what about war? Now, there are two kinds of people generally that are out there speaking about Islam and war. There are some people who say that no, there's no war in Islam. The word jihad means the struggle against the inner self. It's the struggle to curb your desires. It's the struggle to become a better person. And that is what jihad means in the Quran. And the verses that may implicate armed combat, those were, for that time, they don't apply today. This is one type of people that are speaking out for Islam. There's another category of people speaking for Islam, or think that they're speaking for Islam, who say, yeah, that's it, it's all about jihad. You got to wipe out everyone. You got to annihilate anyone and everyone who doesn't agree with you. And that's it. You have to take matters into your own hands, and you have to use aggression, you have to use violence, and you have to kill whoever opposes you. These are two types of people that are trying to speak. Each of them is trying to represent Islam. But to be fair, both of them are completely wrong. And both of them are doing nothing more than misrepresent the actual teachings of Islam. One gentleman, as I was just getting off of a plane, came to me and asked me a question. He was an elderly gentleman. And he said, are you Muslim? I said, yeah. He said, well, that's a pretty violent religion, isn't it? I said, pardon me? He said, yeah, you got all that jihad going on, and you know, the Quran opens up with, you know, verses of using the sword, and I said, no, there's no such thing as that. The Quran does not open up using verses of the sword. The Quran opens up using verses defining what guidance is. Proclaiming it as a book of guidance is there to guide people. There's no mention of the sword. And I said, if it's jihad that you're asking about, and you want to use the institution of jihad to form a conclusion that Islam is a violent religion, then let me ask you a question. Is Canada a peaceful country, or is it a warmongering country? And I think most Canadians would like to believe that Canada is a peaceful country. But then it begs the question that, do they have an army? Do they have weapons? Do they have an air force? Do they have bombs and missiles? Do they have soldiers that they train to kill people using guns and all kinds of weapons? The answer is yes. Well, that sounds like a lot of doom and destruction. All those bombs, all that artillery, all that training. So you will say, well, every nation has the right to defend itself. Every nation has the right to protect its citizens and to protect its interests. And that right to defend itself and its interests has always existed, and it cannot be taken away from anyone. The right to protect oneself cannot be taken away, cannot be stripped from a person, from a group, from a nation. And since time immemorial, people have prepared themselves for the inevitability of war and violence, which may occur for a plethora of reasons. But generally speaking, whenever a group feels that its people, or its land, or its interests, or its allies are under threat, they will mobilize these forces. I said, Canada is a complete country. It offers its citizens everything, and protection is one of the basic things its citizens need. Islam proclaims to be a complete religion. How could it claim to be a complete way of life when it doesn't touch, if it doesn't touch the aspect and the inevitability of defense? However, no matter how peaceful a country is, it will have all of these means, these arms, but it will also have laws and systems that govern them. There has to be laws. Our defense assets are monitored and governed by a whole system of laws. And how they are utilized, when they are utilized, is decided by a process. For example, our political representatives will go and they will debate the issue in the parliament, and they will represent the views of the different communities. It will be debated there, it will be discussed there, and in that manner it will be decided whether those armed forces are to be mobilized or not. And there are many, many laws that the federal government has in place and that international communities have put in place to make sure that these assets, these forces are not misused. The moment all those weapons and artillery fall into the wrong hands, it means destruction. So we have so many laws and rules and systems to protect it from falling into the wrong hands. And if all of us over here were to have a beef with some country, let's say our neighbors south of the border, and say we hate them because of this reason and this reason and this reason and this reason. The youngsters say, oh, we don't like their movies. Somebody else says we don't like their food. Somebody else says we don't like the border weights. Somebody else says, I have this reason, this reason. A whole bunch of people get together and you say, you know what? We're sick and tired of these people. And we, on behalf of Canada, declare war on these neighbors. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. And if this group of people were to somehow get access to weapons and try to declare war on behalf of Canada, they would be deemed criminals by Canadians and criminals by the country that they are trying to attack. Because they don't represent either. They obviously don't represent the enemy, and they don't represent the country that they live in because they have not gone through the due process. The country will decide. The country's institutions will decide if those measures are to be taken or not taken. Islam has a very comprehensive system of defense. We need to call it as it is. You need to understand Islam as it is. The system of jihad in Islam is your ministry of defense. It's your ministry of defense. It's there for a very practical reason, the same reason any country would have it. And it has a great deal of legal structures that govern it, that make sure it does not fall into the wrong hands. What you're seeing today is people and groups are taking this structure into their own hands, claiming ownership of it, and then trying to declare jihad on other groups. And when the Muslims see that, when 1.3 or 1.5 billion of us see that, we're saying, who the heck are you? Who told you you could use that word? And who told you you could use that label and make it look like it's something that's representative of the religion? We don't give you the right to do that. And we speak, and we call it as it is. But those people who choose to misuse religion and religious texts and religious information and religious systems for their own ends and for their own purposes, they refuse to listen, and they insist that their version of Islam is the correct version of Islam. Whereas the whole Muslim community across the world says, no, that is not Islam. It's never happened that way. And remember one thing. When someone like myself speaks, when we speak about Islam and Islamic interpretations, we speak for those interpretations that have been upheld by mainstream Muslims for more than 1400 years. We're not trying to find another interpretation just to counter that one. We're talking about the way Muslims have always lived and always believed. India, for example, since for centuries, for over a millennium, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and all the other religions, they were living in peace and harmony in the country of India. It's a non-issue. For centuries, Muslims, Jews, and Christians were living in harmony in the Middle East. In Israel itself, or in Palestine itself, there was never an issue. You'll hear Jewish rabbis telling you about it. I have. So it's not that Islam promotes an intolerance towards other faiths. It's not that Islam wants this absolute control over the world, no matter what it takes. That's not what Islam is. If that was the case, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, peace be upon him, would have demonstrated that. In the times, in the occasions when he had those opportunities, when he had the upper hand. But he didn't, and he set a precedent for all of us. So yes, there's a time and a place for war. Sit down with the generals of the Canadian Army and speak to them about it. That's their business. They're in the business of war. They'll explain to you what goes behind a war, what is war, and what is it all about. So this puts us in a very interesting position. On one side, we see a great deal of people who don't have too much knowledge about Islam to begin with. It's little things, little snippets that they've heard or read in the news, in the mainstream media. And I would say anyone who turns to the mainstream media for knowledge or education on any subject is going to have some serious problems. You cannot study a subject by going to mainstream media to learn about it. Mainstream media is giving you the news. They're giving you the news from a perspective. And many times it's just one perspective that's covered. There are many other things behind the scenes that we never learn about. So if we want to educate ourselves about the religion and get a clear understanding, we have to go to the source. The second thing is that Muslims have been, are, and will remain committed to maintaining our Islamic identity. Because we believe that Islam is something very beautiful. It is something very great. That's why we hold on to it. We are committed to upholding our identity, and we refuse to be browbeaten or intimidated into stepping back just because people have misconceptions about us. The second thing is we are committed to upholding our pledges, our treaties, just like our Prophet, peace be upon him, upheld his pledge and his treaty. We live in all the countries of the world. We have certain duties and obligations towards those countries, the foremost of which is to make sure that we conduct ourselves in a peaceful manner. And as far as these individuals are concerned, or these groups are concerned that are inciting violence, inciting Muslim youth to go and join them, to declare some kind of a jihad against any country and every country that doesn't agree with them, well, the good news, I guess, you could say, the good news is that they don't even consider us Muslims. Forget about you guys. To them, even we're not Muslim. And that's what justifies their killing of thousands and thousands of people. Remember one thing. Islam and Muslims have suffered more at the hands of terrorists than any other religious group. Period.
Yes, sir.
The bombings that go on in marketplaces, in the streets, all of the destruction that's taking place, who has been on the receiving end in Syria and Iraq? By and large, they are Muslims. And the justification that's given by these people is, no, they're not Muslims, they're apostates. And they've gone so far as to say that all of those Muslim leaders who don't agree with us are also apostates. They should also be killed. And the people who live in their country should also be killed. So there you go. So it's just me and a few buddies now that are Muslim. The rest of the world, the rest of the 1.3 billion don't count. You can kill them all. And we see this as a serious problem for Muslims. We have lost thousands of lives. We are the ones whose collective image has been destroyed by these people. And we are the ones whose women that wear headscarves, whose children that go to schools are being harassed and intimidated and looked at in a funny way, in a suspicious way, and made to feel unwelcome in every setting today. Every time one of these fools goes and does something or conveys a message, who does it come on? It comes on us. We're the ones who have to suffer. Our people, the ones that are looking for jobs, all of a sudden have more difficulty in finding jobs. Our students have more difficulty in getting along with their colleagues. Our women have more of a difficulty maintaining their Islamic dress, and it goes on and on and on. Terrorism that is conducted by individuals proclaiming to be Muslim is more detrimental to Islam than anything the non-Muslims are doing. The non-Muslims may be at odds. Many groups of non-Muslims may be at odds with Muslims on many issues. But they have not and cannot do the destruction to Islam that has been done by these people. Boko Haram. Look at that. It just goes on and on and on. Paris shootings. What's that all about? Ottawa shootings. What's that all about? So we see this as a serious problem. And it's sometimes frustrating to have people come to us and say, what are you doing about it? And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to do? If the authorities couldn't stop it, you want me to step in? Mufti Asim is going to go and stop this Ottawa shooter? What are you doing about it? What we are doing is A, we condemn the actions, we condemn every single act, and I will say it's unfair that mainstream media does not cover those condemnations. Which is why I still get media people asking me, how come you don't speak out? It's like, what's wrong with you? We're shouting it off the rooftops. If you can't hear us, it's not our problem. You don't come into our mosques and listen to what message we're giving. It's not fair. It's absolutely not fair. Every single Muslim leader condemns it. They condemn it through Facebook, in their mosques, through statements that they give on their websites. What else can you do? They distance themselves from it. They dissociate themselves and their communities from it. They speak out against it. So that's happening. The second thing is that through this campaign against violent extremism, we have been able to successfully educate thousands of members of our community using very broad platforms and educate them about actual issues so that tomorrow, should they receive a message, should someone reach out to them inciting them to do something violent, they have become immune. We're trying to inoculate our youngsters against messages that incite violent extremism, and we're committed to that. So this is what we can do. We are working with law enforcement agencies to help increase the awareness of the issues and to try to address the issues before they happen. Once an event happens, it's already too late. One life lost is too many lives lost. And so in our own little way, at the community level, with whatever resources we have, scant as they are, we are committed to try to educate people about what Islam is really all about. And we are committed to try to make Muslims understand that any call to jihad here on Canadian soil or any call to criminal violence is unacceptable Islamically, and it is unacceptable ethically, just like it's unacceptable legally. So this is where we stand, and we look forward to educating the masses on these issues. I have been very, very broad and general in this talk. I haven't gone into the specifics. There are many specific issues that we discuss with our communities. There are many narratives today that groups like ISIS are giving, they're presenting, and we are deconstructing that narrative piece by piece. In other words, when they come, they use a verse of the Quran, or they use a teaching of the Prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, that says, oh, now you're obliged to do this. We'll explain to them, in the light of that same verse, why they are not obliged to do that. And that's something we are doing with our community. It's a work that the scholars have undertaken, and we have seen some amazing results. So moving forward, we hope to create a positive vibe. We hope to create a positive awareness so that the tensions and animosities and the suspicions and the doubts and the friction and all of those negative things that sometimes come into a community after a dangerous event like the Ottawa shootings. We want to mitigate that. We want to remove that. And we want to stand on one platform with all of the communities of Canada to speak out and try to put an end to all of these things. So with these words, I conclude my talk. I'm sure some of you will have questions. You'll have a chance to ask those questions later on. And thank you to all of you for attending this program and making it successful. And we hope, I sincerely hope that every one of you will leave with a message, and be able to reach out to someone else and educate them and increase their awareness. We're going to have Sergeant Gravel speaking from the legal perspective, from the law enforcement perspective, and I hope we'll step out of here with some enlightenment and with some understanding and be able to address these issues as partners instead of as counterparts. Thank you very much.